Hi class, and welcome to the last chapter we'll be examining in our course together for HIS 151. We're looking at chapter 15, the rise of empires in the Americas, and we're also adding in the component of the pattern of the development of religious civilizations in this time period, and how do we see that in this area of the world. So when we think about empires in the Americas, we usually think of the Aztecs and the Incas, and they are the two that we're going to focus on for this time period. So we look at, North and what is being referred to here as Mesoamerica. We think of the Yucatan Peninsula, we think of the Mayans, we think of the Aztecs in this region as well. But we also have the Mississippian culture here in North America and the Pueblo cultures here in modern-day southwest New Mexico. But this chapter really does focus on mainly the Mesoamerican and then South American groups of Native Americans. So we think about the Toltecs, the Olmecs, and the other groups of Native Americans we met in Mesoamerica in the earlier chapters, and the remains that they left in this part of the world. So the legacy of the Toltecs in Mesoamerica is they established a ceremonial center that still attracted pilgrims after the city-state ended around 600. The Toltecs centered at Tula, originally a small town and a ceremonial center. The Toltecs came from northwest Mexico and spoke Natal. They forcibly conquered towns and created a state with about 120,000 people. They had an origin myth that prophesied a priest-king to return. The first city-state to feature sacrifice of captured warriors, they created a military state dominated by warriors, a model for later states in the same region. They had armor made up of wood breastplates and cotton helmets and shields. Weapons were wood swords with different types of stones fastened on the edges and daggers. And they created colonies around Tula rather than using direct conquest. The Toltecs traded obsidian for cacao, vanilla, feathers, and gemstones. The Toltecs began bronze casting around 1200, and they used this for axes and ceremonial bells. Their city-state collapsed around 1200 as the farm tax base declined, perhaps due to soil depletion or drought. This then caused the resurgence of the Maya by 650 to 900 until collapse due to crop failure and malnutrition. Small Mayan state and Chichen Itza survived until 1000. In the time after the fall of the Mayan again, we are going to now switch and take a look at the American empires, the Aztecs and the Incas. And this is showing the area in which the Aztecs lived. And then specifically here, the Valley of Mexico and where their capital is. And then there is some artwork here depicting Aztecs. And then in the next slide, we have the Incan Empire, which is huge. And then the intricate roadwork and steps that the Incas built. So let's start discussing the founding of the Aztecs. The founding myth of the Aztecs describes the migration from northwest Mexico to the Mexican Valley. Their founder worshipped a warrior hunter god, and this god promises to lead him and his descendants to fertile land. They first settle in Tula, which Aztecs claim as part of their heritage. Then the leader leads them to, then the leader is told them that they need to keep traveling south, and they have a vision of an eagle on a cactus. The eagle tells them to build a temple at that spot and nourish their god with blood from their war captives. Historical record locates the Aztecs in the 14th century as a client of the Toltec successor state. The Aztecs settled in the valley by building two islands, Tenochtitlan and Tehuelco. They built a ceremonial center at Tenochtitlan. They married into local elites and created a council of their own elites and priests. The Aztecs formed a triple alliance in 1428 with 2 states and began to build an empire. Led by an Aztec who dominates the Triple Alliance, the local elites left in power but had to attend ceremonies at Tenochtitlan, offer gifts, intermarry with the alliance's elites, and leave sons as hostages. Commoners provide tributes of food, labor, and raw materials such as obsidian. Aztec put governors in charge of some conquered regions. Some states continued to resist conquest and would later support the Spanish. And that's going to be important to note that we are ending this course right around 1500, and the moments after the Aztecs' rise in power is when the Spanish come in. So right around the turn of the 1500s, we will see the arrival of the Spanish, particularly Cortez, and look at his influence on the Aztecs. And there's some videos in the supplemental videos that if you'd like to watch about the Aztecs and their empire, and they show you and describe the end of their empire, which sadly happens right after Cortez arrives. Some states continue to resist and would later support the Spanish, because what happens is these conquered states would have to offer up, as you see in this image, war captives, and then the war captives would be used as human sacrifice. And these smaller states around the Aztecs were then aligned with the Spanish, and the Spanish used them to help win control over the Aztecs. The Aztecs used the threat of sacrificing war captives to induce other states to submit. The Aztecs established schools to train boys to fight, one for elites and one for commoners. New graduates became porters in the army, extending the reach of the army. Promotion in the army determined by how many captives for sacrifice one had. A soldier became a veteran after 4 captures. More captives meant a higher rank. The Aztec weaponry improved on the Toltecs. Weapons, longer obsidian-edged swords and bow and arrow. Armor consisted now of quilted cotton shirts, cotton helmets, and a shield. The Inca built their empire from the capital of Cusco in southern Peru, or South Peru. They called their empire the Four Regions to indicate its size, and they had a founding myth that resembles the Aztec myth. The god or creator god, known as the sun god, selected 4 brothers and 4 sisters from caves. The 4 are paired off and promised a fertile land, which they have to take from the farmers already settled there. There is little historical evidence of individual rulers until a leader named Pachacuti in 1438. And there is a video in the supplemental section on how he rises to power and how he claims the throne. And it shows a reenactment of him in battle, and it shows the mummification of the elders that are brought into battle. So it's a pretty interesting video if you have some time to watch it. The Incan modeled their society on the Tiahuanaco and the Wari. Their society from the household level to the city-states was divided into an alul, or a king group. The elites provided the ceremonial feast, including beer made from fermented corn or mole pepper berries. Aluls, subjects to the Incas, would rebel if they felt the feast was not comparable to their contribution in their reciprocity agreement. Incan conquest began under Pachacuti, and borders will eventually reach into Ecuador and modern Chile. Cusco laid out as a grid with 4 streets reaching into the 4 regions, so harkening back to their creation myth. The 4 regions divided into provinces and run by the Incan governors and sub-governors. The local elites in the provinces were in charge of 10,000, 1,000, 100, or 10 households. So we see groupings here of 10, or the tens. The elites had to organize the mita system, a service obligation of farming, herding, manufacturing, military service, or portage. Mita payments of goods or foodstuffs stored locally in the houses, and mita payments for labor used to build everything from roads to temples. Records of the mita were kept on a quipu, or knotted cords, and these have not yet been deciphered. Local elites were commanders in the army through ethnic Incans, or the generals. The soldiers were organized by age and marital status. Married men of 20 to 30 were foot soldiers. Unmarried men of 18 to 25 were porters. Weapons include bows and arrows, dart throwers, clubs with bronze spikes, bronze axes, and woodworking. And all of these things are meant to inflict harm. Many believe that the Aztecs were the most militaristic in their fighting and those types of things, but the Incas were known for it too. There are two trunk roads that went north and south for communication and movement of troops around the empire, and these bridges were the connectors between those lands. The Aztecs had one of the most urbanized civilizations in the world. Half of the 1.5 million people under Aztec authority lived in urban centers. And now we're getting into a little bit of the imperial society and culture of the two groups of people. Tenochtitlan was organized on two platforms, one per island. And when you zoom in, and look at this picture, you'll be able to see that this is an island of where this capital is being built. And you might remember back to the September when Mexico City had a really tough earthquake. This is the lake bed that Mexico City is built on. Tenochtitlan was an organized city with government supervised market delivery of drinkable water by aqueduct and removal of waste to farm fields. The salinity of the lake was controlled by dikes, and both pyramid and market centers surrounded by residential quarters. There was everything that you might have seen in a modern European city at this time. We see here in the Aztec world too. Elites, craftsmen, merchants lived closest to the center of the city, and then farmers lived further away, similar to what you saw in feudal society. Farming was done on raised fields called chinpapas, and common crops were corn, bean, pepper, squash, and cactus. The bean, peppers, and squash, these are often known as the three sisters of farming because they replenish the earth. And here's an artist's rendering of what the city must have looked like, or could have looked like. And Cusco, the capital for the Incas, had a temple dedicated to the sun god at one end of the city. Residential houses and smaller ceremonial centers were spread out before it. Only the elites lived in Cusco. Commoners lived in the suburbs. The temple was built with precisely cut stone blocks, a method borrowed from the Tihuanca, and residential houses arranged by courtyards, a pattern borrowed from the Wari. And here you can see some of the stonework and masonry, and there'll be a video posted or a link posted about Machu Picchu, which is another example of the masonry work that the Incas did. The Inca required tribute attractive girls from across the empire, selected by state inspectors. They were sent to houses of chosen women to be trained in cooking, weaving, and officiating in rituals. After training, girls became temple priestesses, married to non-Incans as rewards, palace servants or concubines for the elite. And lastly, Incan rulers and principal wives were mummified and maintained in the houses of Cusco. And this is mentioned in that video about Pachacuti, that these mummified remains were often taken into battle and taken out in procession and shown off and presented around town. So think about the effects of religion on these empires, and then also think about how they compare to the empires we saw earlier in our chapters when we talked about Rome and Greece and Persia and the empires in India and China. Just think of some of the common features that we see in all of these. And then think about the patterns we've been studying. The formation of religious civilizations, the formation of agricultural centers, the formation of visionaries and empires. How do we see all of that now that we've come to the end of our course? And knowing what comes next, if you take HIS 251, you'll be looking at 1500 to present, and right here where I leave you is the cusp. We're looking right over that edge of when the, if you will, the old world, the world of Europe, Africa, and Asia, has contact or makes contact with the New World, and the two hemispheres are brought into contact with one another. So consider what happens because of that, if you want to think forward and if you're going to take that course, but also think about what has happened so far. How do we see empires and from human origins to agricultural centers? How do we see visionaries? How do we see religion in these time periods? I hope you've enjoyed the course in these videos. I've enjoyed working with you this semester, and good luck as we come to a close here. Thanks.